You're not ugly. She did this to you. The maid's toddler exposed the billionaire's fiancé. They took everything from him. Everything. And they smiled doing it. Not his money. Not his empire. Not the towers of glass and steel that bore his name across 3 continents. No, they took something far more precious. They took his face. His confidence. The way he used to walk into a room and feel like he belonged in it. 7 years of whispered cruelties disguised as love. 7 years of hearing, "You're lucky I stay," wrapped in perfume and silk. 7 years of a beautiful mouth saying ugly things. Slowly, methodically, like water carving a canyon, until the man who once commanded boardrooms couldn't look in a mirror without flinching. She didn't hit him. She was far too clever for that. She used words. Silences. The slow architecture of shame. And she built it so carefully that he thought he built it himself. He believed every lie she ever told him about who he was. Until a 3-year-old child, barefoot, jam-stained, completely unaware of what she was doing, told him the truth in 11 words. Stay until the end. Because justice, when it finally comes, is beautiful. Welcome back. My name doesn't matter. This story does. What you're about to witness is what happens when cruelty finally meets its mirror. When the person who was broken the longest stands up the tallest. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever been wronged and wished for justice? Because every week, justice wins on this channel. Subscribe and never miss the moment it arrives. Ethan Cole was not supposed to be soft. The financial press didn't write about soft men. Forbes didn't feature them. The kind of man who builds a logistics empire from a single inherited warehouse in Detroit, who turns 22 employees into 2,200 in under a decade, was supposed to be granite. Just sharp. He's cold. The world expected Ethan Cole to arrive in rooms the way lightning arrives. Fast, blinding, and indifferent to whoever got struck. But the people who actually knew him, his logistics manager Dara, who had been with him since the beginning, his driver Mr. Holt, who was 63 and called him son when no one was listening, the cleaning staff of Cole Tower who waved at him every morning, they knew the truth. Ethan Cole held doors. He remembered birthdays. When the company hit its first billion, he hired a private chef for a week and fed the entire floor, including the overnight security team, including the woman who watered the lobby plants. He was, underneath the empire, still the kid who grew up watching his mother stretch every dollar at the kitchen table. He'd never forgotten what it felt like to be looked past, so he made a decision early. He would never make anyone feel invisible. Not on purpose. Not on his watch. At 32, he had everything the world said should make a man complete. Penthouse. The portfolio. The car that drew stares at red lights. And he had Vivian. Vivian Ashcroft was 28. And she was the kind of beautiful that made photographers nervous. Dark hair that moved like a single decision. Green eyes that looked like they were always calculating something pleasant. She had grown up in the orbit of old money. Not the center of it, but close enough to have learned its language, its posture, its particular brand of entitlement that never quite announced itself directly. She wore it the way some people wear cologne. You only noticed it when you were already too close. They had met at a charity gala 3 years prior. Vivian had laughed at something he said. Really laughed, or so it seemed. And Ethan, who was not accustomed to being seen as funny, had felt something unlock in his chest. They dated slowly at first. Then faster. Then she was everywhere, folded into his life so naturally that he couldn't remember the exact moment she stopped being a person he was dating and became a permanent fixture of his identity. He loved her. He was certain of that. What he was less certain of, what he silenced when it surfaced, was whether she loved him or the particular ecosystem that surrounded him. His household staff was small and loyal. Chief among them was Rosa Delgado, 31 years old, who had worked as his housekeeper for 4 years. Rosa was methodical, quiet, and possessed of a dignity so complete it required no performance. She arrived every morning at 7, worked through the day without complaint, and took care of the penthouse the way other people take care of things they love. She had a daughter, Marisol, 3 years old, who occasionally came to work with Rosa when childcare arrangements fell through. Ethan had no objection. He liked children. Marisol, for her part, liked the elevator buttons and the kitchen stools and the way her voice echoed in the high-ceilinged living room. Everything in those days felt like a world in balance. The sunlight came through the floor-to-ceiling windows in long, clean stripes. Ethan had begun planning the proposal, a ring already purchased, tucked in his desk drawer. He ran his hand over the velvet box sometimes, at the end of long days, and felt something he could only describe as readiness. He was ready to choose this life, this woman, this future. He did not know that the future was already choosing for him. He did not know that in 4 weeks everything he believed about himself, every certainty, every quiet pride, would be systematically dismantled by the woman he planned to give that ring to. He did not know that the only person who would eventually save him from it was 38 inches tall and couldn't tie her own shoes yet. What would you have done if the person you loved most was quietly teaching you to hate yourself? The morning light was generous that day. Ethan stood at the window, coffee in hand, and watched the city breathe below him. Rosa moved through the kitchen behind him with her usual quiet efficiency. Marisol sat on a stool, carefully coloring a page that appeared to be a horse, or possibly a dog, with extreme concentration. Vivian was still asleep. Ethan glanced down the hallway toward the bedroom. He thought about the ring. He thought about the dinner he had planned, the restaurant booked, the speech he had quietly rehearsed in his head while pretending to read quarterly reports. He smiled into his coffee. He had no idea what was already living in his house. It did not begin with anything you could point to. That was the genius of it, if genius is a word that can be applied to deliberate harm. Vivian Ashcroft did not announce her campaign. There were no dramatic confrontations, no sudden cruelties that could be named and quarantined. It was subtler than that. It was the sustained work of someone who understood that the deepest damage is always done with a smile. It started with a comment. Visual. Throwaway. They were getting ready for a dinner, a partner event at Cole Logistics, the kind of evening where Ethan was expected to be visible and confident. He came out of the bathroom in his suit, adjusting his cufflinks, and Vivian looked at him with an expression that was almost, but not quite, sympathetic. "That suit is doing its best," she said, turning back to her mirror. He laughed. He thought it was a joke. He wore a different suit. 3 nights later, at a gallery opening, she touched his jaw while someone was taking their photograph. A small, private touch. Tender almost. "You should look into that skin thing," she murmured, so quietly only he could hear. "I know a doctor." She said it like a kindness, like concern. He didn't know what skin thing she meant. He went home and stood in the bathroom for 15 minutes, examining his face. This is how it worked. Small detonations, placed precisely at the moments when he was most open. Before photographs, before important meetings, before events where his confidence needed to be intact. She would land something, a look, a word, a silence that carried the weight of a verdict, and then smile and move on, leaving him to excavate its meaning alone. "You laughed too loudly in there. Did you mean to say that the way you said it? I don't think that story landed the way you think it did." None of it was shouted. All of it was said quietly, reasonably, with the inflection of someone who was merely helping. And because Ethan was the kind of man who took feedback seriously, who had built his career on his ability to identify his own blind spots, he listened. He adjusted. He second-guessed. He began to shrink. It happened so gradually that no single moment was legible. He stopped telling stories at dinners. Vivian had suggested gently that he had a tendency to dominate the table. He stopped laughing freely. She had mentioned once that his laugh was a lot for enclosed spaces. He began editing himself before he spoke, running each sentence through an invisible filter that asked, "Will she wince at this?" Rosa noticed. She noticed the way Rosa noticed everything, without comment, without intervention, because it was not her place. But she saw how Ethan's posture changed when Vivian entered a room. How his shoulders dropped slightly, preemptively. How he smiled differently at strangers than he smiled at his fiancée. Fuller, more unguarded, more himself, as if the safest place to be Ethan Cole was everywhere except next to the woman he loved. Vivian, meanwhile, had identified Rosa as a problem. Not because Rosa had done anything. She was exemplary, punctual, thorough, professional. But Vivian was the kind of person who required everyone in her environment to understand their position clearly, and Rosa's quiet competence. Her obvious reliability, the way Ethan trusted her without discussion, bothered Vivian in a way she couldn't directly name. So she named it differently. "I'm not sure she's the right fit anymore," Vivian said one Sunday, not looking up from her phone. "She's been with you a long time. These things get comfortable. Comfortable gets sloppy." "Rosa's not sloppy," Ethan said, confused. "I've noticed things," Vivian said, in the particular tone she used when she wanted something to feel settled. "I'll handle it." Ethan by that point had learned not to push back. He told himself it was because he trusted her judgment. He told himself he was being a good partner. The truth, though he couldn't see it yet, was that he was afraid of her. Not physically. Never that. He was afraid of the things she did with her expression when he disagreed. The slow, disappointed recalibration, the look that said, "I thought you were smarter than this," that had become, over 3 years, one of the most powerful forces in his life. So Vivian began managing Rosa. A task repeated unnecessarily. A criticism delivered with witnesses. A request made in a tone that dared Rosa to push back. Rosa did not push back. But her eyes, dark, patient, watching, retained everything. And Marisol, who was 3 and had not yet learned to be strategic about where she looked or what she said, sat on her coloring book stool and watched Vivian the way small children sometimes watch things they don't have words for yet. One afternoon, Vivian walked past her in the kitchen. Didn't acknowledge her. Didn't look at her. Marisol tracked her exit with wide, solemn eyes, then turned to her mother. "Mama," she said quietly, "that lady doesn't like us." Rosa put down her cloth, looked at her daughter, said nothing for a moment. "Finish your picture, Mija," she said softly. But she didn't say the lady was wrong. What would you have done if you watched someone you admired slowly disappear inside a relationship? The engagement dinner was beautiful. Vivian said yes with her hand over her heart and tears that caught the candlelight perfectly. Ethan slid the ring on her finger and felt, for one blazing moment, like the man he used to be. He did not see Vivian glance at herself in the mirror above the restaurant booth while he was still on one knee. He was not meant to see it. But the restaurant's security camera, it would later turn out, was. There is a particular kind of breaking that happens not in a single moment but across accumulated ones. A compound fracture of the spirit, so slow that the person suffering it cannot identify the injury until they are already on the floor. By the time Ethan Cole understood what had been done to him, he was already living inside the damage. The man who greeted his staff every morning by name had stopped making eye contact in hallways. Not from arrogance, from exhaustion. He had become a person who pre-apologized, who qualified every statement, who asked Vivian before meetings if she thought he was on enough, as if his own adequacy were a reading that required external calibration. His closest friend, Marcus Webb, who had known Ethan since university, who had watched him build the company from the ground up, called him one afternoon in genuine alarm. "What happened to you?" Marcus said. Not unkindly, just honestly. "What do you mean? You just let Vivian answer for you. 3 times. In your own boardroom." Silence. "She knows the industry," Ethan said. Another silence. Marcus let it sit there between them, heavy and obvious, before speaking carefully. She's not the one who built it, Ethan. That night, Ethan stood in the bathroom again. He had been doing this more frequently, standing in front of the mirror, looking at his own face as though trying to find someone he recognized. The face that looked back at him was technically the same. Same jaw, same dark eyes. But there was something behind the eyes now that hadn't been there 3 years ago. A flinching quality. Preemptive apology. When had that happened? He heard Vivian in the bedroom on a call. Her voice was warm and easy in a way it rarely was with him anymore. Relaxed, unheld, freely laughing. He found himself standing in the bathroom listening to her laugh through a closed door and feeling, without being able to explain it, like a stranger in his own home. The next morning, he was in his office earlier than usual. Rosa arrived, found him there, and made coffee without being asked. She set it beside him without ceremony. "Thank you, Rosa," he said, staring at his laptop. He paused at the door. "Mr. Cole," she said, and something in her voice made him look up. He stopped, seemed to reconsider. "Is there anything else you need?" He almost said no. He almost sent her back to her work. Instead he said very quietly, "Do you think I've changed? In the last few years?" Rosa was still for a long moment. In her arms Marisol, who had come to work with her that day, pressed her cheek against her mother's shoulder and looked at Ethan with her round, earnest eyes. "People change," Rosa said carefully. "Sometimes for reasons they don't choose." It wasn't an answer. It was a window left slightly open. He didn't go through it. Not yet. He wasn't ready. What would you have done if someone you loved told you with their eyes what they couldn't say with words? The worst night came 3 weeks later. A dinner party. Guess. Vivian at the head of the table, brilliant and magnetic, stories spilling from her like light. Ethan sat 2 seats away and watched his own fiancée hold the room, and felt what he could only describe as relief. Relief that she was doing it so he didn't have to. Relief that no one was looking at him. He caught his reflection in the window behind the guests. He barely recognized the expression on his face. Me. Careful. Waiting. He excused himself. Went to the kitchen for water. Stood at the counter in the silence. The applause of laughter reached him from the dining room. Vivian's voice rode over it, easy and in command. He stood there for 4 minutes alone, and let himself ask the question he had been burying for months. What has she done to me? He didn't have an answer yet. But the question was now alive, and questions, once alive, do not go quietly. Began with a child. Not a dramatic revelation. Not a confrontation. Just a small, serious 3-year-old girl sitting on a kitchen stool on an unremarkable Thursday morning, eating a banana with the focused attention of someone completing important professional work. Ethan came into the kitchen before Vivian was awake. Rosa was cleaning the counter. Marisol was on her stool. Ethan poured his coffee, and Marisol looked at him. The direct, unbothered gaze that only very young children and very old people can sustain without it becoming strange. "Hi, Marisol," he said. "Hi," she said. She considered him. "You have a sad face today." He blinked. "Do I?" She returned to her banana. "You have a sad face lots of days." Rosa had her back to them both. But her hands had stopped moving. Ethan sat down at the counter across from the girl. "I don't feel sad," he said, somewhat uncertain. Marisol looked at him again with the patience of someone who has plenty of time and no interest in being lied to. "Your eyes are sad," she said. Then matter-of-factly, "My eyes are sad when Mama cries." Beep. "Does your mama cry?" Ethan asked quietly. Marisol looked at her mother's back. Then back at Ethan. Then at her banana. She had been told, in that wordless way children are told things, that this was not a topic for conversation. So she changed the subject in the only way she knew how. "You have a nice face," she told Ethan with complete conviction. The lady says you don't, but she's wrong. The kitchen went absolutely still. Rosa turned slowly, expression controlled, eyes held carefully neutral. Ethan did not move. What lady? He said very softly. Marisol gestured vaguely toward the bedroom hallway. Your lady. She talks on the phone and says your face is embarrassing. She worked at the word. Embarrassing. Embarrassing. Ethan set down his coffee cup. Very slowly. She says that, he asked. His voice was even, but something underneath it had shifted. The way bedrock shifts. Imperceptible on the surface, catastrophic in the deep. Marisol peeled a new section of banana. She says to her friend. She says. She scrunched her face, remembering carefully. She says she'll fix you after. What does fix you mean? Rosa stepped forward. Marisol, let's. No, Ethan said quietly. It's okay. He looked at the child. He looked at his coffee cup. He looked at the hallway leading to the bedroom where Vivian still slept. Thank you, Marisol, he said. You're welcome, she said, and returned to her banana with complete serenity. What would you have done in that moment? When the truth finally arrived and it was smaller and more honest than anything you expected. He did not confront Vivian that day. He needed to think. He needed to be certain. And some part of him, the wounded part, the part that had been systematically taught over 3 years to doubt his own perceptions, kept whispering, maybe you misheard. Maybe she meant something else. But he was also, underneath everything Vivian had constructed, still the man who had built an empire on clarity. On looking at what was actually there, not what he wished was there. He called Marcus. I need the security footage from the restaurant. The night I proposed. Marcus was quiet. Ethan. Don't ask me why. Just get it. 24 hours later. He sat in his private office, door locked, and watched 17 minutes of footage from the restaurant's upper corner camera. The proposal. Tears. The hand over the heart. And then, 3 seconds after he slid the ring on her finger, while he was still on one knee, while his face was still turned up toward hers in complete, unguarded love, Vivian glancing sideways at herself in the mirror. Not at him. Herself. Checking. Adjusting. The expression on her face in that 3-second window was not the expression of a woman in love. It was the expression of a woman evaluating a performance. Ethan watched it twice. Then he closed the laptop. He sat in the silence for a long time. When he stood up differently than he had in years. Freighter. Filler. The quiet that came off him was not the emptiness of the last months. It was something else entirely. It was the quiet of a man who has finished doubting himself and has begun, very calmly, to act. He gave himself 1 week. Not to plan a confrontation. Not to rage. Ethan had not built what he built by reacting. He had built it by positioning. By making sure that when he moved completely, and the ground had already shifted before anyone knew to brace for it. He called his attorney first. Elena Sato, who had handled coal logistics legal architecture for 6 years and who, when Ethan laid out what he needed, asked exactly 3 questions and then got to work. He called Marcus second. I need to know who Vivian talks to. The friend on the calls. And I need to know what Vivian has moved through the joint account in the last 18 months. Marcus found out in 48 hours. The friend was a woman named Celeste Harmon. Old money, new cruelty, and apparently in receipt of regular audio dispatches about what Vivian privately referred to as the renovation project. Meaning Ethan. Meaning the systematic work of making him smaller so that when she was finally done shaping him, he would be grateful enough to let her run everything. The joint account told a different story in numbers. Significant transfers. A property in Lisbon, purchased under a name adjacent to Vivian's. A legal cousin of her maiden name, barely distinguishable unless you were looking. A designer account in Milan. A consulting retainer supposedly for a brand strategy firm, that led, when followed carefully, to Celeste Harmon's holding company. Vivian had not been planning a marriage. She had been planning an exit. A well-furnished, well-timed exit in which Ethan Cole, sufficiently diminished, would be too beaten down to notice, let alone litigate. Rosa came to him on day 4. She knocked on the office door in the evening, after Vivian had left for a dinner. She stood in the doorway with her hands folded and the careful expression she wore when she was about to say something that cost her something. "I should have told you sooner," she said. "I'm sorry." "Told me what?" And then Rosa spoke. Not everything, she had not heard everything. But enough. The calls she had overheard. Fragments drifting from the bedroom. The way Vivian had spoken to her, and about her, in front of guests. The afternoon Vivian had told Rosa, with perfect pleasantness, that she had 1 month to find something more suitable after the wedding, as though Rosa's 4 years of loyalty were a subscription about to lapse. "She told me not to tell you," Rosa said. "She said you wouldn't believe me anyway." She said. Rosa paused. A flicker of something crossed her face. "She said you'd learned not to trust your own instincts." The room was very quiet. "She was wrong about that," Ethan said. Rosa looked at him, really looked at him, the way she had been carefully not looking at him for months. What she saw made her exhale slowly, with something that might have been relief. "Yes," she said. "I can see that. What would you have done if you had the chance to finally, completely set the record straight?" He planned it for the following Friday. Vivian had organized what she was calling a celebration dinner. Their engagement party, 40 guests, the penthouse, catered. It had seemed, when she proposed it, like a gift. Now he understood it for what it was. A performance with audience. He was going to let her have her stage. He was simply going to change the script. Elena had the documents. Marcus had the transfers. The security footage was preserved and time-stamped. Ethan had spent 3 years being made to feel like a rough draft. He was about to show Vivian what a final version looked like. He called Rosa the evening before. "You don't need to work tomorrow night," he said. "Take Marisol somewhere nice. Dinner. Something she'll like." Rosa understood what he was not saying. "Mr. Cole, you'll have your position here as long as you want it," he said. "I should have said that a long time ago. I'm sorry I didn't." When Rosa spoke, her voice was steady, but only just. "Thank you," she said. "Thank Marisol," he said. "She's the one who started this." He could hear Rosa smile through the phone. He hung up and stood at the window, watching the city below, the way he had on that last good morning before the cracks began. The suit he had chosen for tomorrow was his favorite, the one Vivian had told him to throw away the year before because it aged him. He had almost done it. He had not. He put on the suit now, even though it was evening, and stood in front of the mirror. He looked at his face. His own face, the one a 3-year-old with banana on her fingers had called nice with the iron certainty of someone who has no reason to lie. He stood there for a full minute. He didn't flinch once. The penthouse had never looked more beautiful. 40 candles. Cascading flowers. The kind of catered elegance that costs more than most people's months. Vivian moved through it in a red dress like a woman who knows exactly what she has built and intends to be thanked for it. She greeted guests with warm laughter and pressed cheeks, and the specific grace of someone who had practiced being charming since childhood. Ethan arrived at his own party at 8:15. 15 minutes late, which was deliberate, and which Vivian would not appreciate, and which he found, for the first time in years, not frightening but simply interesting. She found him the moment he walked in. Her eyes did the quick sweep, the outfit check, the assessment, and he saw the almost imperceptible tightening around her mouth when she registered the suit. "You wore that," she murmured, smiling for the room. "I did," he said pleasantly. She took his arm. "We'll talk about it later." "Yes," he said. "We will." The evening moved forward. The dinner was served. Vivian gave a toast, graceful, funny, touching, that positioned her as the steady force behind a great man. Several guests laughed warmly. Several looked at Ethan with a particular expression that said you're lucky to have her. Ethan smiled and held his glass. At 9:40 he stood. The room quieted. 40 expectant faces. Vivian beside him, hand light on his arm, smile practiced and ready. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he said. "I want to say a few things." He sounded different. Even the guests who had just met him could feel it. Some quality in his voice that was entirely unedited. Not performed. Not pre-apologized. Just true. "I spent 3 years learning to distrust myself," he said conversationally, as though sharing something interesting. "My instincts, my laugh, my face, the way I told a story, the way I took up space. Someone I loved worked very hard to make me believe that the version of me she was shaping was an improvement. It wasn't." Vivian's hand had gone still on his arm. "I found out," he continued, "some things recently. With the help of my lawyer, my oldest friend, and a 3-year-old who sat on a stool in my kitchen and told me I had a nice face with such complete confidence that I had to take her seriously." A ripple of uncertain laughter. Turns out she was right. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a folder on the table. Slim, white, precise. "Elena." His attorney materialized, calm and formal, at the edge of the room. "Vivian," Ethan said, turning to her fully. And now his voice was not angry, was not theatrical, was simply the voice of a man who has made a decision. "These are the account transfers. The Lisbon property. The retainer paid to Celeste Harmon's holding company. And a full record of every call made from this penthouse's landline to a number registered to Ms. Harmon, beginning 3 months after we started dating." Vivian did not move. Her face had done something extraordinary. The social machinery of it had simply stopped. Beneath the beauty and the composure and the practiced warmth was something cold and sudden and afraid. She said nothing. "The ring," Ethan said softly, "was a gift. Keep it. I've already had my jeweler's confirmation that it's fully paid and legally transferred. Beep. Consider it a severance." He picked up his glass. "Thank you all for coming. There's a full bar and the lamb is excellent. I'd encourage you to stay." He looked at Vivian one last time. Not with rage, not with satisfaction, but with something quieter and more final. The look of a man returning to his own face. "You'll receive the rest from Elena in the morning," he said. "Have a safe evening." What would you have done if the justice you'd waited for looked exactly like this? Quiet, certain, and completely yours. Vivian left 11 minutes later. She walked through the door with her composure almost intact. Almost. The slight hitch in her step, visible to anyone looking carefully, was the only tell. In the days that followed, the full picture assembled itself publicly and thoroughly. The transfers. The Lisbon property in her cousin's name, now subject to civil action. The recording Celeste Harmon had made of Vivian's calls, kept, it turned out, as insurance by a woman who trusted no one, which surfaced through discovery and which included, in Vivian's own pleasant, perfectly modulated voice, 3 years of systematic, detailed, coldly gleeful narration of exactly what she had done and planned to do, and how certain she was that he would never figure it out. "He's too conditioned now," she had told Celeste 8 months before. "It's almost too easy." Ethan read the transcript once, folded it, put it in a drawer. He did not open that drawer again. Rosa returned to work the following Monday. She brought Marisol, who went immediately to her stool and asked, with great seriousness, if there were bananas. There were. Ethan had made sure of it. He sat across from Marisol while Rosa made coffee. The little girl colored. He read his reports. It was very ordinary and very quiet. After a while Marisol looked up. "Is the lady coming back?" she asked. "No," Ethan said. Marisol considered this. "Good," she said. and returned to her coloring. Ethan looked out the window. The morning light was coming in long, clean stripes again. He picked up his coffee and stood there for a moment, entirely unheld. Not pre-apologizing. Not calculating someone else's response to his expression. Just standing in his own kitchen, in his own light, with his own face. He felt, for the first time in 3 years, like himself. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. Karma is slow. But it always arrives. Not with thunder. Not always with headlines. Sometimes it arrives in a courtroom. Sometimes in a transaction. Sometimes in the cold, exposed silence of a woman walking out of a dinner party she planned for herself, carrying a ring she didn't earn and a reputation she can no longer manage. And sometimes, the most devastating times, karma arrives through the mouth of a 3-year-old who just wanted to finish her banana. Ethan Cole didn't become harder after this. That's what's remarkable. He became clearer. He went back to learning names. To laughing loudly. To telling stories at dinners without apologizing first. To standing in front of mirrors and staying there. He gave Rosa a raise and a contract with full benefits. He told Mr. Holt on a drive through downtown that he was glad they knew each other. Small things. True things. He stopped editing himself for people who were never worth the revision. Have you ever watched someone finally get what they deserved? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. If you felt something during this story, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach the people who need to hear it. And if you're new here, subscribe. Because next week, we're covering the story of a woman who spent 12 years being called too much by everyone who loved her, until she finally found out what too much actually looks like when it's aimed back at the people who said it. You don't want to miss that one.